Alright, welcome to your emotional intelligence final. If you haven't already done so, go ahead and print out your PDF there so that you've got something that you can kind of take notes with. I encourage you to fast forward, rewind, whatever you need to do. I'm just going to go right through these very quickly. And then as always, the concept behind the way we give our finals is it is not to trick you. It is to lay out plainly in front of you what is the core material that you should learn from this course, and as long as you learn this, you'll be fine. Alright, number one, discuss the concept of thought management. So the idea here that I'm after is we had right from the very beginning, I talked about the average person has somewhere between 12,000 and 50,000 thoughts per day, but the majority of them are spent on things like worry, reliving the past, trivial matters, stuff like that. Thought management is the concept of managing these thoughts away from negative and unproductive uses and being intentional about applying your thought power towards positive and productive goals, right? Number two, what was the principle behind the different brain teaser illustrations that were used in class, right? The main thing behind that, the underlying principle, is that when you're dealing with problem solving, longer and more deep and reflective thinking is advantageous over quick initial thinking, right? So the idea is you give somebody one of these brain teasers, their initial reaction is almost always wrong. And so the idea is that many times in problem solving, you have to take that same idea and realize that, man, maybe my initial thought here is wrong, and I need a little more reflective time to deal with this problem. Number three, define metacognition. An easy way to define that would be it's thinking about thinking, right? It's reflecting on your thought processes. Number four, we expand the notion of what it means to be intelligent by adding, what I want here is by adding an understanding that intelligence is not just factual information, it is also emotional intelligence, right? That by adding an understanding that intelligence is not just factual, it's not just academic, but it is also emotional intelligence. Number five, emotion comes from the Latin root word motere, which means to move. Number six, describe the fight or flight mechanism. So you're going to want your body gets tense, blood goes to the extremities, the arms and the legs. You tend to have heightened awareness of the problem, if not reflective thinking, at least more focused thinking, right? And it becomes very stressful, right? That's the key there, is that in the fight or flight mechanism, fear, stress, tension, anxiety all begin to be released into the body because of the hormones that affect the fight or flight mechanism also affect stress levels. Number seven, describe the parasympathetic mechanism. The parasympathetic mechanism is the opposite of the flight or fight mechanism. It is the mechanism of peace, of relaxation, of renewal, and it is in every way essentially opposite to the flight or flight. It is non-stressful. And so you need parasympathetic activities, things that trigger this system, in order to balance out the stress levels in your life. This is why renewal is key to being able to fight stress levels, right? Having opportunities to just get away and relax, taking a walk, doing something that you enjoy, something that will trigger your parasympathetic mechanism, helps you to reduce and fight against high levels of stress. And then the other thing to keep in mind, it's not really one of the questions, but along the fight or flight mechanism, we often think of that if there's some like dramatic event that triggers high levels of this. But the truth is, everyday annoyances and frustrations trigger this mechanism to a lesser degree. But the cumulative effect of these smaller inconveniences and frustrations throughout the day can be quite damaging to your stress levels and your overall system of enjoyment, right? Number 8, explain in your own words how an understanding of emotional intelligence explains why faith is a choice and not a feeling. All right, so I want you to, you may have to go back and look at the lesson on this. I'm going to give you a hint here. What the idea is that your brain processes both rational thought, which is words, and feelings, right? And the Bible says that faith cometh by hearing, and hearing by the word, which means that it is processed primarily in the rational part of your brain, and it is also spiritual. But the idea here is that when we understand that it is two different parts of the brain, emotional intelligence handles feelings, rational intelligence handles words and thoughts of that nature. And so the idea is that because faith cometh by hearing, and hearing by the word, that it is more like a rational choice, a decision that we make to believe, than it is a feeling. Sometimes people think faith is some kind of feeling that they have to feel. But the truth of the matter is, it's much closer to a decision and a choice from the rational brain than it is just some emotional feeling. Alright, number 9. What is the implication that a woman's amygdala is generally smaller than a male's? Well, the amygdala is where all good thoughts come from. And so if a woman's is smaller than a male... No, I'm just kidding. That's a joke. The amygdala is where aggression comes from. And so if a woman's amygdala is generally smaller than a male, that explains why a woman is typically less aggressive generally than a male would be. Number 10. Describe what each of the following 3 brain systems are responsible for controlling. So brainstem, that's your kind of unconscious things. Your heart rhythms, your things that you're not thinking about consciously that keep you functioning. Limbic system, that is your emotional core, right? And the prefrontal cortex is responsible for rational thought. Number 11, describe in your own words the implications from the discovery that the amygdala is capable of its own analysis on an emotional level. This means that first of all, the amygdala is not in your prefrontal cortex, so it's not rational thought, right? But what that means is that the emotional part of your brain is conducting its own analysis of your current situation, right? And that is impacting how you overall feel and how you think about things. And sometimes we don't realize that this is taking place because it's at the emotional brain and not the rational brain. But what research has shown is that the emotional brain makes its own analysis and has its own decision process that influences how you choose and how you live your life. And so the idea is that there are underlying emotional decisions that you are making that you may or may not be aware of. This is why someone that is abused at an early age often has a hard time dealing with things and letting go of the connections that they've made emotionally at a younger level, because their emotional brain is still influenced by the emotional pain they felt at a young age, and it is affecting how they choose things in life, and they don't even know it because it's not in the rational part of their brain. Number 12, which hormone is a major stress inducer, it should say inducer there, or can lead to emotional instability? That is cortisol. Cortisol is your stress hormone. Number 13, list the 3 hindrances to creativity. Right? So one of them is routine. Right? Whenever you get into routines, your brain tends to use a different part of the brain than the creative brain, which is why we talked about if you get into environments that your brain does not associate with any given routine, it frees up the brain to be more creative. The second one is stress. Stress, if handled properly, can motivate you towards new ideas, but by and large, stress hinders the creative functions of the brain. And the third one is the ego, right? If someone is too prideful, it hinders their creativity. They're not even thinking about creating new things because their ego locks them into a given way of thinking, right? And it becomes hard for them to think outside of the box. Number 14, what happens to creativity the longer we're on the job? Well, it begins to decline. Research shows that the longer you're at your position, the less creative you are with your position, which is why if you're going to put in some new things, a lot of times it's best to do it right when you first get on the job. The longer you stay at a job, the more your brain begins to associate the job with routine, and then that begins to shut down the creative side. So that's your answer to 14 and 15. So 14 is saying that it begins to decline. 15 is why. So that's what I was saying there, is that your brain begins to associate your job with time as a routine. And that is an opposite part of the brain from creativity, which is why often when somebody first gets hired, they have a lot of creative thoughts that everybody else that's been working there for a while does not have. And so it's good to operate on that initially, because the longer they're there, the more prone they will be to developing routines and systems and no longer thinking creatively either. All right, number 16. What does it mean that emotional aptitude is a meta ability? It means that emotional aptitude affects many of your other skills and abilities, right? So your emotional intelligence does not just affect your emotions, it affects your ability to do many other things in life. It's a meta ability. It's influencing a wide variety of things in your life. Number 17, describe in your own words the role that guilt plays in emotional intelligence. All right, so this is one of the ones I want you to do on your own. I want you to go back in. We've got an entire video for guilt that we put in. It was an entire class session where I dealt with guilt. So I didn't give you many lines. Really, your answer is probably going to be more than what you can fit in here. But I want this one to be your own discussion. I want you to go back in and research this and explain to me the connection between guilt and emotional intelligence and the influence that guilt plays on our emotions. Number 18, list and describe 2 of the competencies given in class for developing workplace emotional intelligence. Okay, so I gave you a few. Let me just read through. I'll read through them. You may need to go back in and get your descriptions, but I'll give you a list of some of what I'm talking about. Self-awareness, adaptability, self-control, positive outlook, achievement orientation. These were different things I gave you in that lesson. Any of those 2 with a brief description will suffice. Number 19, list and describe the 3 major categories of competencies. So I put these on the board. There are 3 major areas of competency that you're going to deal with, particularly in a workplace setting. There are social intelligence competencies, right? This is how you interact with the other people, your relational skills. There is emotional self-awareness, right? Kind of your own emotional intelligence. We could call it that. If you want to call it emotional intelligence, that's fine. So social intelligence, emotional intelligence. So emotional intelligence really is dealing with your own internal emotions. Social intelligence is your ability to interact and use your emotions and your intelligence in social settings to connect with people. And then the third one is cognitive, right? Cognitive competencies. Those are all your thinking, strategic skills. And so these 3 areas, emotional skills, social skills, and cognitive skills, are the 3 major categories of competency that you need to be successful in. Number 20, why is it that you need to overemphasize positive emotions? Because the chemical effect of negative emotions is much stronger than positive emotions. So a negative emotion will stay with you much longer than a positive one. So you need to overemphasize the positive and have much more positive interactions in life to help balance out the negative. Number 21, describe the concept of the tipping point in relational conversations. So if you remember, we talked about whenever people are having conversations, particularly if there was a high level of intensity, like they're angry or something like that, that there has to be a tipping point where they calm down enough, right, that they begin to shift into a mode where they can begin to hear you, right? They shift from negative to positive. Let me get this off. There we go. Pardon the interruption. Right. All right. Describe the concept of the tipping point in relational conversations. The idea of the tipping point is that if people's intensity gets very high, they are in a negative frame of mind, a negative emotional state, and their ability to think rationally and to hear you and to receive what you're saying is diminished. And so through gentle answers, calm talking, you can help them calm down enough till they get to the place that's called the tipping point. And at the tipping point, the conversational tone begins to shift. And people begin to talk in a different way. And it is a physical reaction going on the inside that often they're not even aware of, that they calm down enough that then the conversation begins to shift. And it becomes more rational. It becomes easier to talk with them because they're no longer dealing on an emotional level only. Right? Number 22, explain the concept in class connecting emotions and judicial thought process. This is the next one that I want you to do on your own. We talked about judgment and how emotions play a role in judgment, and how you decide between two things is influenced by the emotion you feel towards the people involved in the decision, right? Number 23, what was the principle of the story with the out-of-control train, right? So the idea behind that, this is somewhat connected with the previous one, was that whenever you're making decisions and emotions are not connected, you tend to operate with a rational thought process. But the moment that emotion is interjected, right? Remember, because we put originally 5 people on the train that you didn't know that would have died, and then we then said, well, what happened if one of the 5 was your child, right? Then all of a sudden you would not want, or if that one person rather on the other track was your child, then you'd be much more likely to save your child, even if it meant 5 people died on the other train, right? And so the idea is that when it was just 5 person versus 1 person on the 2 different tracks, and that you didn't know any of them, you would save the 5 over the 1 because there's just 5 as more people. But if the 1 on the other track becomes someone that you know, then all of a sudden you would save them and get rid of the 5. And so the idea is that when you interject emotion into decision making, you get a different outcome than you would without the emotion. And that affects people in a lot of ways. They don't even realize that they're making decisions based on emotion. Alright, 24. Describe the difference between ideal self and the ought self. The ideal self is how you see yourself, right? What you would like life to be like, right? The ought self deals with your responsibilities and the things that you feel you have to get done, right? And they're not always the same. Sometimes what we feel responsible to do and what we wish we were doing and how we see our strengths are 2 different things, right? Sometimes we have responsibilities that are not in line with what we would really like to be doing and how we'd like to be contributing. Number 25, what is the key to handling the emotion of anger? It is the self-talk. Remember we talked about that? It is the self-talk that happens in the first few moments after anger. If you can begin to talk to yourself and begin to rationalize, and we gave the example of if somebody cuts you off, if the first thing out of your mouth is, man, I bet they didn't see me, then you handle the anger differently than if the first thing out of your mouth is, what is this person trying to do? Are they trying to hit me? It is the self-talk that you use after the triggering of the emotion of anger determines whether it lingers or whether it disappears. Number 26, what is the key to handling the emotion of anxiety? We talked about this in the very last class here. And the idea behind that is that when anxiety first happens, the purpose of it is good. It allows you to analyze various potential problems that are coming up. The trouble is that many people never take anxiety to its proper end. Its proper end is a resolution of some sort. So you say, well, I'm a little nervous about this. The resolution for a person of faith is often, I'm a little nervous about this, but I believe God is going to see me through no matter what, right? And so they've capped off the emotion of anxiety with some kind of resolution. And it may be, okay, I'm anxious. There's 3 different ways this could turn out. And so the key is to determine in your mind that you're at peace and how you're going to handle if any of those 3 happen, right? You may not enjoy all 3 of them, but you have a resolution in how you see all 3 of them. And then once you come to a resolution of your anxiety, you use your anxiety to think through various possibilities, and then you come to a resolution. Lord, whatever happens, I'm okay. I trust you. With that resolution, you can walk away from the anxiety. Where anxiety becomes debilitating and destructive is when people never cap it with a resolution, and it just stays as this lingering emotion of anxiety that swirls within them, and it becomes all kinds of neurotic things like fear and worry and sometimes debilitating because they're so anxious, because it never got capped off with an adequate resolution. Okay, 27. Explain why people often stay in a state of readiness after they've had an outburst of anger. If you remember, the limbic system sends out 2 different signals when someone gets angry. One of them is an immediate rush of emotion, and that tends to go away within just a few minutes. The second chemical released is adrenal cortisol, and that stays in the system for hours and days even, and it causes you to stay at a high state of readiness, which means you could flip back into anger very quickly because your adrenal cortisol levels are so high. And so often if people stay frustrated, they've got a hard time at work for a few days, they've had some outbursts of anger, they need to step away from some things and give their levels a chance to come down, because this is why sometimes people snap over things that don't seem very significant. It's because their levels of adrenal cortisol have become so high that they're in this state of readiness, and any little thing triggers something that if they had been in a more peaceful state, it would not have triggered a reaction. 28. Explain how understanding affects our perception. If you remember, we talked about the person who gave everyone a hard time in the survey. He was giving everybody a hard time, and then he left the room, and he gave the woman at the door a hard time. And when he left the room, she says to everybody, "Oh, you guys have to give him a break. He just went through some serious personal problems this week." And then without exception, everyone gave the guy a break. They gave him a pass for his bad attitude, right? And the principle is that because they understood his situation, they were more willing to have mercy and compassion, as opposed to people that in the other survey that the woman didn't say that. All of those people were very upset with the guy's rude attitude. And so the study showed that people who had understanding of the person's situation tended to be much more sympathetic and compassionate towards them. 29. The key to maximizing IQ is self-control. We talked about that in the last class as well. IQ is the kind of the internal ceiling on potential, right? But the maximizer of potential is self-control, and your ability to manage your impulses maximizes your IQ. Number 30, list and describe one of the strategies given in class for maintaining brain health. I gave several: exercise, sleep, antioxidants, several different things. I just want you to give me one with a description. Okay? All right, if you have any questions about this, make sure you let me know. You can send me an email. But by and large, if you understand this material, you should be good to go for your final.